a steady, dull thud. That's what Madolyn kept hearing, over and over again. It started as a dream. She was 8 years old, back in Wisconsin. Her grandpa was driving a wooden post into the ground with a very large sledgehammer. With each swing and strike of the hammer, the sound would shake her bones, as well as the ground below her bare feet. The wind was cool and choppy, blowing her hair around her face and into her eyes and mouth. She would push the hair back away from her face and watch Grandpa drive the post into the ground. The thuds from the hammer grew louder and louder as the sky began to darken. She turned away, looking to the east as black clouds began to cover the sky, and the low rumble of thunder shook the ground. As she turned back towards her grandpa, he slowly began to look less familiar to her. The sledgehammer had taken on a warped appearance and seemed to grow in size. The post sank into the ground and began to split and spread out at the bottom into huge roots that dug deeper into the soil. The top of the post flattened more and more until it resembled a large black tree stump. As Madolyn stared at the trunk, it became obvious that the dark texture had a reddish-brown tint to it. Rain began to wash over the stump, and the dark red matter began to seep into the soil. It was blood. Grandpa was no longer driving the post into the dirt with a large sledgehammer. In his place was a tall, bony figure, wearing a dark cloak and swinging a giant axe down onto the blood-covered stump. Each strike came down upon the neck of a small, pink pig that squealed in fear and pain as the blood gushed from its neck. It just wouldn't die. She tried to scream, but the thuds were so loud that they drowned out her voice. Madolyn began to fall and spear into darkness. She couldn't breathe. She had no way of knowing which way was up or down. Finally, with the last loud thump, she sat up, gasping for air in the middle of the bed. The hotel room was dark and cool, and it took a few long seconds to realize where she was. She was very relieved that it was all just a dream, and yet she slowly grew sad as she remembered she was alone and lonely. After 15 years of marriage, she was once again single at 42 years of age. She pulled her knees to her chest and gave them a big hug to comfort herself. It did little to help. She cried anyway. After the pity party was over, she wiped her face, sat up straight, and looked at her phone. It was nearly 5 o'clock p.m. She jumped up immediately, hopped into the shower. With a toothbrush full of toothpaste in one hand and a bar of soap in the other, she began multitasking her usual morning routine. Her entire life was backwards. She wasn't working at the flower shop anymore, so she had no reason to get up before sunrise. She was depressed most of the day, so she slept a lot. She felt like an irresponsible teenager as she struggled to give herself a long overdue shower at record speed. In less than an hour, she had to be at some restaurant to meet with her divorce attorney, who was doing her a huge favor by meeting her on such a short notice. 20 minutes later, she was crossing the hotel lobby. Thank God it was storming outside. She would not have to explain her wet hair after all. She was digging through her purse to make sure she had her important documents for the attorney.
Jesus Christ.
She suddenly met with a heavy wooden door and nearly toppled a handsome 40-ish gentleman who dropped his drink onto the floor with a very loud crash.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
He was very, very good looking. He was staring down at the shattered drink on the floor and checking himself for spills on what appeared to be a very expensive shirt. After assuring that he was not drenched, his eyes narrowed and slowly began to rise up towards hers. Madolyn took a split second to push her hair behind her ear and assume a flirty, innocent look. She already began feeling childish and giddy. In over 15 years, she had not so much as blushed at a good-looking man. And now here she was, only 3 days divorced and ready to pounce on this hunk. But when his eyes met hers, her flirty smile faded away quickly. Madolyn was a very attractive woman. She knew this by all the looks she'd received ever since she was 12 years of age. She was valedictorian of her high school, as well as beauty queen, and even had trophies to prove it. None of that meant a thing to this man. She knew that right away. His bright blue eyes seemed to darken until they were almost entirely black. No one had ever looked at her like that before, not even her ex-husband, when she demanded half of the business assets. This man stared at her with pure, unhinged hatred. Her blood ran cold, and she stepped back a few paces.
I'm very sorry.
The man never spoke a word, and he never stopped staring right into her eyes with that hatred. She'd never felt so weak and intimidated before. Not even when she walked in on her husband and her sister in bed together. Sensing the tension, the bartender interjected.
"I'll get that. Don't worry about it. I got you another drink on the house, sir."
Not seeming to notice or even flinch at the bartender's comment, the man continued to stare at Madolyn. He seemed to take in every inch of her. Thankful that he released her from his imprisoning gaze, she now watched as his eyes traced her cheeks, down her neck, down to her breasts, her waist, her dress, even down to the heels on her feet. In an instant, his eyes snapped over her shoulder, and with a quick wisping sound, he shoved a wrist in between them both, revealing a very expensive platinum Rolex. He made a quick note of the time, then dropped the watch, once again locking her into his gaze.
"Is there anything else I can do for you, ma'am?"
He asked, coldly, and with great distaste.
I'm sorry.
Her eyes began to tear up. Without sympathy, he walked right past her, knocking her off balance just enough that she had to step back awkwardly. If he had been even remotely unattractive, Madolyn could have easily thought of some witty comeback to throw back at him. Even though he completely humiliated her, she couldn't think of a single thing to say bad about him. She was just absolutely broken by his abrasiveness. She just gained her best composure and walked past him with her head down, hugging herself. He was standing by the hotel entrance and staring out across the busy street. Part of her hoped he would open the door for her at least. No chance. Instead, he gave a huff of disgust as if she were already getting on his nerves. She pushed the doors open and walked out into the street, realizing she forgot her umbrella. The man stared at the attractive, clumsy woman with an unfathomable hatred as she glanced back at him, still hoping to get some sort of approval or something. She was barking up the wrong tree entirely. He smirked at himself as he watched the destroyed, weak woman pace back and forth, so ashamed and embarrassed that she'd rather stand in the rain than face him again.
Typical woman,
he thought out loud. She was very attractive, though. On any other day, he would have followed her for the night, memorized her habits, found out where she worked, what food she would like to eat, her favorite color, movie, closest friends, family members. Eventually he would seduce her, take her out to dinner, give her the night of her life, invite her back to his house for wine and a roofie.
Stop it.
He had to remain focused. Besides, there would be plenty of time for that later. She was obviously desperate anyway. She'll be back. Enough about her, though. The man thought of Madolyn and what he would like to do to her as sort of a hobby. In fact, he thought of all women as a hobby, a distraction, or something to do when there was nothing else to do. Tonight was not a night for hobbies, though. He was working. He removed his eyes from Madolyn's curvy backside and gave one last glance to the back of her legs before aiming his gaze across the busy street, past the opposite sidewalk, across the fountain, through the bushes, up the stairs, through the rain plopping down in sheets across the ether of the New York's bustling atmosphere. He focused on the apartment building across the street, began to count the windows from the left. 13 from the left. 16 from the top. His heart almost fluttered, as if it were even capable of doing such a thing. He stared at the lone window on the 17th floor of the building across the street. The light was still on. It was 23 minutes past 5 p.m. He had a bit of time before the light would go out. He knew his target like the back of his hand. Daniel Friedman was an up-and-coming politician. He was one of the good guys. He didn't owe anyone anything. No one had any dirt on him. The people really liked him. He was a straight shooter and had a knack for exposing corrupt cops, judges, and other politicians. Naturally, someone wanted him dead before he got too high in the field of politics. Once a politician gets to that point, it's too late to stop him. Too many eyes on him. Too much publicity. It has to be done before. Friedman would be an easy target. There would be an investigation, no doubt, but it wouldn't make national news, and eventually it would become a cold case. There will be no precise motive, no weapon found, no DNA evidence, and no real suspects. It'll be a clean kill, made to look like a robbery. Piece of cake. He glanced back down at Madolyn as she slipped into the cab. He looked away just in time as she glanced back at him, creating the appearance that he had already forgotten about her. He knew how to play women very well, although he detested them. They were a great distraction for him, even still. The only motivation that could tame his obsession was the loads of money from various hits that allotted him to afford the lavish lifestyle that further fed his sadistic habits. As you may have guessed, Madolyn had an unfortunate brush with this very dangerous man. The bad dream she had less than half an hour ago was a warning from her subconscious mind. She brushed it off, like she'd done so many times before. This story is not about Madolyn, though, and it's not about psychic powers. It's about the attractive psycho killer. The man was a vicious serial killer who decided he should get paid for his skills. With no contacts in the black market, no close relationship with the mob, no major drug dealers in the family, with no family to speak of at all, he turned to the internet to begin advertising his services. He made friends with a young computer nerd, female, of course, and got her to teach him everything there is to know about remaining anonymous on the web while keeping a strong fake profile. Once he had all he needed from her, she mysteriously disappeared, and a wicked service appeared somewhere in the dark abyss of the World Wide Web. 10 years later, and several hired hits later, his reputation for getting the job done was well established. This was the biggest job yet. $250,000 for less than 1 week of research and 1 moment of pure joy. Oddly enough, that was the name he chose for his sick, twisted service. Click here. Insert codename J.O.Y. And here you are, sir, and sorry for the mishap. The bartender apologized, handing Joy the complimentary drink. Place it at my seat at the bar, Joy said, without even casting a look towards the bartender's direction. The bartender did as he was told, and was not the slightest bit offended, as he smiled and patted the $200 bill in his pocket. Joy, of course, gave that to him earlier, with a set of simple instructions.
He didn't even mind that the man called him Red, although his name tag plainly stated he was Josh. On an average Tuesday night at the hotel lobby bar, Josh could rake in an easy $150 a night, tending to hotel guests and businessmen and women who always seemed to have a smile on their faces and mischief on their agendas. The hotel was too far from the suburbs, and there were much nicer bars to mingle at, so there weren't many locals or regulars to get to know. They were all strangers, and most of them seemed to be pretty easygoing and generous with their tips. On weekends, though, the place would pack out and Josh could easily rake in $300 a night. Thanks to this rude stranger, though, he was already looking at $350 on a Tuesday. Josh could care less that the guy was a stuck-up jerk. The best tipper gets the best service. It was a bit odd that the guy hardly drank anything, though. In fact, he'd only had 1 drink that was spilled, and the other one on the house that was waiting for him at the bar. The only thing the man asked was that Josh move a bottle of bourbon to the left slightly. Afterwards, he would just move back and forth from his spot at the bar to a booth in the left rear corner of the room. Deciding that a $200 tip was what he deserved and that he needed no explanation, Josh placed the man's drink at the spot at the bar and didn't think about it anymore. He did happen to glance back through the lobby bar door and noticed in the small diamond-shaped window, a strange man was moving a potted plant slightly to the right. Joy moved from the hotel lobby door and made his way back to the barroom, wiping the dust from the plant off his sleeve. As he entered the bar room, he paused at the door and peered out of the window. Now, with that cheap plastic plant out of the way, he had a clear view of the hotel entry door from his bar stool. He confirmed the view as he took up his complimentary drink and pretended to sip from it. He then glanced past the enormous, cheap whiskey bottle behind the bar. Just behind the bar was a window. Outside of that window, through the rain, was a single, tiny apartment window across the street with its light still on. Joy glanced down at his watch. 5:40 p.m. Line 'em up, bartender. This party's about to begin.
A drunken and annoyingly loud voice split the air just as the lobby bar door swung open, banging against the opposite wall.
Oh, man. Sorry about that. Don't know my own strength sometimes.
The handful of patrons that were in the bar all turned to see a good-looking young man in his late 20s dancing and shuffling up to the bar.
Joy was not amused, and already irritated with the disruption of a somewhat balanced crowd. He stared back at the lobby door through the diamond-shaped glass and noticed there wasn't a cab out front. The young man slid in right beside Joy and leaned across the counter to the bartender and said, "Hello, Josh. Can I get a shot of straight tequila, please? No salt, no lime. Just give it to me raw and wriggling." He slid a $20 bill to Josh. "And keep the change, bud." Josh liked him already. Another big tipper. This may just end up being a $500 Tuesday night after all.
Sure thing, boss.
Josh quickly juggled up a nice room temperature shot of clear tequila. And just as soon as the bottom of the shot glass touched the bar, the young man snatched it up, chugged it, and threw it down another $20 bill. "One more time and keep the change, brother."
Now that's what I'm talking about.
Josh joined in, meeting the young man's enthusiasm. After Joy cast him a cruel look, Josh decided to take it down a notch. After all, the strange, quiet man was still the big tipper of the night.
"Tommy Dawson, sir."
The young man stuck his hand out, nearly over the top of Joy's drink. Joy slowly turned his head towards the young man until their eyes met. He knew the type well. A dumb, loud country boy who decided to come to the big city to shake things up. When their eyes met, Joy sent the boy a cold, dark stare right into his big, dumb green eyes. He was either too dumb or too drunk to notice, so he casually followed the boy's cheap shirt sleeve all the way down to his hand, which was still hanging over his drink. He then traced the arm back up until their eyes met again. He raised his eyebrows as a warning to the young man.
"Okay, then,"
the young man said, and quickly extended his hand across the bar to Josh, who gave a quick but hearty handshake.
"So how long you been working here, Josh?"
he began. As the two men began to converse, Joy recalled a quote by Plato he referred to regularly in times like this. "Wise men speak because they have something to say. Fools because they have to say something." After a minute or two, Joy stood up and retreated to the left corner of the room at his other position and pretended to sip his whiskey while keeping an eye on the apartment window across the street. It was getting close to 6 p.m. The light would be going out soon, and his target would be in bed, in his most vulnerable position.
I built that myself.
There was a window next to the booth, and the rain was beating down loudly on the panel. The loud hic at the bar was slowly becoming the star of the show. People were laughing at his jokes and turning around to look at him from time to time with stupid grins on their faces. Maybe it's not too late to find another vantage point. Joy's mind began to drift with the rain and from trying to block out the annoying voice of that redneck at the bar. He suddenly realized his bladder was full. He didn't want to stand up, though. There he was, a cold-blooded killer, yet still afraid that he would be singled out or spoken to by the loud young hick. He felt a sinking familiar dread. He was 6 years old again.
"You're a worthless, smelly bastard, just like your no-good father,"
his mother yelled at him. He'd wet the bed and had just been beaten bloody by his drunken mother, who was tearing the sheets off his bed. She picked up the mattress and threw it across the room over his head. She was a strong, crazy, and vicious woman. She would get drunk and put cigarettes out on his legs. His father ran off, most likely to get away from her, but she always seemed to blame him for it.
"Worthless little piss stain. You're going to end up just like your father, weak-minded, thin-blooded, useless excuse for a man."
Joy feared women his entire life because of his mother. Until one day, he found out just how strong he really was. It was a Friday night around 11 o'clock. He was 15 years old. His mother had been drinking and man-bashing with her girlfriends all night. She came into his room with a pool stick and began wailing on him with it. He put up his hands as she broke the stick across his forearm. He'd had enough, and in a flash of fear and anger, he fought back, punching, kicking, until she laid in a puddle of blood in the floor, whimpering. He walked out and never looked back. He lived on the street for a while and managed to get a job at the city's sanitation department. A garbage man. That's when he began to take notice of certain things that people threw away. You can learn a whole lot about a person by looking through their garbage. Girls would turn up their noses at him. One girl in particular was especially cruel to him. She would turn over the trash can every time she saw him coming. She would be the first of many victims. That was a long time ago, and Joy had gotten much, much better at it. Given all he'd been through, there was no way in hell he would let some young punk redneck intimidate him while he was attempting to kill a man for $250,000. He stood up and proudly walked across the barroom to the restroom, feeling somewhat accomplished, and at the same time, not so much. Public restrooms are so disgusting. He washed his hands and sniffed the air to make sure the place was a suitable place to urinate in. It wasn't too bad. He guessed that Red seemed like a hard-working young man, so he gave it the benefit of the doubt, unzipped and relaxed.
Woohoo! Great minds think alike, huh, partner?
The annoying redneck once again pulled up right next to him and began leaking and splattering all over the place.
Do you mind? Oh, I'm sorry, bud. This thing's got a mind of its own. Got no control over which way it squirts. I've had just about the best day of my life, and I don't want it to end. Went to Speakeasy, the casino. I was down about $2,000 on blackjack. But then I won a couple here, won a couple there. One on roulette. Was about to leave, won 50 grand. I dropped one coin, won 50 grand on a damn slot machine.
50 grand? Joy asked, then realized how dumb he'd just sounded and decided that that was more than enough chit-chat for one night. Well, good for you. He spoke with less enthusiasm and more sarcasm.
Damn right good for me. Man, I'm happy as I could be right now. I tell you what, I haven't had my hand on that kind of money in, well, never.
Joy was washing his hands by this point and walking out the door while the man was still talking. He quickly retreated to his booth in the back and gathered his thoughts after dropping character in the bathroom with a drunk idiot. Across the bar, out of the window, and across the street, the light was out. It's showtime. 13 from the left, 16 from the bottom, suite 17D, back of the room, far left. He would pick the lock, ease through the dining room, past the kitchen to the bedroom, put 3 quiet shots into Daniel Freeman's chest, 1 in his head. Same with Mrs. Freeman. Then he would take his time, go through the dressers and jewelry boxes. He would destroy the place, take whatever was pocketable and valuable, close and lock the door behind him. He would then turn, kick the door in, and disappear down the stairs into the alley. All in a day's work. The rest of the money would be a direct deposit, clean, untraceable. The loud redneck was back at the bar, talking over the storm. People like him were annoyingly attracted to Joy, and he knew if the guy saw him leaving, he'd be on his heels. There was a back door that led out to a patio. He would have to circle around the building, but at least no one would notice. When the time was right, he eased open the door and slipped outside. The rain was gushing down. There was a small wrought iron fence to climb over, which led to the alley behind the bar. J.O.Y. quickly ran down the alley into another alley behind the bar. The east entry door code, 7437. I'll have 16 flights of stairs, he whispered to himself. His adrenaline began to flow, and his heart quickened with excitement, anticipation, and fear of failure. He reached into his coat pocket, quickly pulled out the 9mm pistol, and screwed on the silencer. He retrieved a demonic fabric Halloween mask, placed it in his shirt pocket. Thunder began to boom overhead, intensifying the entire experience. Rain is very good when you're planning to kill someone. It washes away evidence. Police are slower to respond, and everything is wet and miserable. It also drowns out suspicious noises. He had every item in check and in its place. He had his thoughts in order. His plan was solid.
Man, what the hell are you doing out here?
That annoyingly loud voice shouted at the end of the alley.
Are you kidding me?
J.O.Y. hissed under his breath. If he gets in my way, I'm going to shoot him in his stupid face, he thought loudly to himself. Trying to come up with an excuse, J.O.Y. decided brutal honesty was the best solution. He quickly approached the drunk idiot, got right in his face, and said,
I'm trying to avoid you. That's what I'm doing. Everywhere I go, some low-life idiot tries to strike up a conversation with me. I'm just trying to spend one quiet night out. And here I am, running out into the rain like a fool. Just so I don't have to talk to you. Go bother someone else, you stupid redneck.
After a few moments of eye contact, J.O.Y. nearly felt sorry for the poor guy. The stupid grin slid away from his face, and his eyes drifted towards the ground. J.O.Y. almost felt like he should apologize. But he had more important things to do. He simply walked past the drunk fool.
I just wanted to share something with you, J.O.Y.
A completely different voice said behind him. Startled and in slight disbelief of what he'd just heard, J.O.Y. spun around and said, "What did you say?" But nothing came out. Just a high-pitched hiss escaped him. But not from his mouth. It came from the gaping hole in the right side of his chest. J.O.Y. fought to catch his breath as another hole appeared in his left side, puncturing his last good lung. Foamy blood began to sputter out of the two giant slices in his chest where he was now breathing from. In plain, clear English, the young redneck said, "What was that, J.O.Y.? You know, to me, it sounded like you were going to apologize to me." "No? Well, I think it's much too late for that anyway. You don't know me, do you?" "Well, how could you? We've never officially met. You see, I'm a good friend of Mr. and Mrs. Friedman. And just like yourself, I've been hired to kill somebody. You see, that's your part in this whole thing, brother." J.O.Y. swung his pistol around weakly right into the young man's hand. "Whoa there, let me take that from you, J.O.Y. You don't want anyone to get hurt now, do you? I have one more message from Mr. Friedman. He asked that you deliver this message to your recent boss. You tell him this. But you know what? I think I'll just tell him myself." There was a heavy pain as a razor-sharp 10-inch blade penetrated Joy underneath the rib cage, straight upwards into his heart, and then twisted violently. Joy fell to his knees and collapsed on the hard alley pavement, and his life began to flow gently down a filthy drain. A thunderstorm was in full bloom. Madolyn returned from her dinner meeting with her attorney. She was optimistic and a bit cheerful. There was a good chance that she and her ex-husband would come to a fair agreement. She would get back what was rightfully hers. She hesitated at the hotel entrance. She was suddenly reminded of the cruel but handsome man who humiliated her. She began to feel insecure all over again.
Let me get that for you, ma'am.
A kind young southern voice spoke out as the door was opened for her.
Thank you so much.
She said as her insecurity began to drift away. He was a very handsome man. A little too young for her, but he looked at her with respect, and yet shown a polite and obvious attraction to her. She blushed.
You have a good night, ma'am.
Hope you have a nice, cozy sleep.
Thank you. You too.
As the young man entered back into the hotel bar room to close out his tab, he glanced back at Madolyn and watched her as her curvy profile ascended the stairs. Business first, he thought to himself, his eyes following the shape of her calves down to her heels. Maybe another time.